The Practical Tax Podcast with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. The information contained in this podcast is based upon information available as of date of recording and will not be updated for any changes in law or regulation. Any information is not to be considered tax advice or legal advice and does not form an attorney-client relationship. Further, this podcast may be construed as attorney advertising. You should seek professional consultation for your individual tax and legal situation.
Welcome again to another edition of Practical Tax with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. Steve, you know, it's interesting that you talk probably to as many individuals and as you do businesses, which is a bigger part of the Moskowitz LLP practice?
Both, because when you're dealing, we're mostly dealing with business people, but besides dealing with the business, we deal with their taxes personally, and there's such an interrelation. And then usually there's a relation with the spouse, possibly the kids. So it's not just, oh, we'll do the business and they'll do something else. The individual, we look at the whole package, what's best for the business, what's best for the individual.
That's great. I mean, and that kind of brings us to our next guest is Dr. Jane Gardner. She is a business specialist and a strategist who has been doing this for more than 30 years and nice enough to join us here on Practical Tax. Good to have you here, Dr. Jane.
Hi, Jane.
What are some of the guiding principles for business objectives other than profit? I know profit is the one, but what are some of the other ones? And both of you just jump in.
Oh, I'd love to talk about that because it's about people too. You know, we have to put in the people place. And I really believe that a lot of CEOs that I'm working with are beginning to do that. And not only to do that, but beginning to see that it increases their profits when they become more caring, more understanding, more valuing of their employees. They work harder, performance goes up.
Steve, you've had hundreds of employees over the years. Do you find that's part of it with the people that you hire as well?
Absolutely. And one of the things I pride myself on is I have a number of colleagues and we've worked together for over 20 and 25 years. And in today's marketplace, that says something. You know, I very much believe in the people. And as far as a business goes, of course, profit is super important. But when you care about things like, you know, being green, when you care about, you know, doing good social things, the irony is not only do you feel better and you're doing a good thing on this earth, the irony is you actually do wind up making more profit. And, you know, I see that. And, you know, sometimes there have been some individuals that I've dealt with that were in their business for a long time. And let's just say that they were a little gruff and they knew how to do something. I said, well, you know, the way you're treating people, do you know why you have 9 different assistants during 1 year? There's a reason for that. They're not lazy or stupid. It's not them. It's you, buddy. And
oh, Steve, that's a hard one. That's a hard one to come up with, isn't it? It's about you. Oh, whoa.
You know, I've been in California for over 30 years, but I moved here from New York City. And in New York, we were direct. And although people out here have made me nicer, and I want to give them credit, and those are colleagues of mine that have taken some of the New York out of me and made me nicer. I still have a lot of New York left in me. And we were direct in New York. You know, in New York, it was, you looking at me? You got a problem with me? And then you resolve things directly.
Travis,
right.
Talking to me? I don't see that. Let me ask you guys a question.
Talking to me?
This wasn't on my list, but you made me think of it. What's the best way to fire someone?
Wow. The best way to fire someone is to have such a great relationship with them that they know it's coming. You better have talked to them about it several different times, written them up, but just let them know they aren't performing. Usually how I teach CEOs to fire someone is to help them find another job.
Steve, you don't seem like to me, and I've known you for a long time, that you would do that well. You seem that like, I mean, I've known many of the people that have worked for you and they all seem happy and driven. Have you had to do that? And how hard was it for you?
Well, you know, as any business owner, that comes up. Sometimes people don't understand what they're getting into. And in fairness to everybody, sometimes somebody, especially somebody new that hasn't been in the profession or is just out of school, they think they'd like to be a lawyer and then they don't. And what happens? So just like Jane was talking about, you say, well, is this for you? There's some people who are just unhappy doing that. And as a responsible employer, somebody needs to be supervised. And if they're doing something wrong, say, well, look, you can't do X, you have to do Y. And somebody might say, well, they not only do they not enjoy it, they don't like it, it makes them sick. There's a lot of medical problems caused by people who are just miserable with their jobs. And, you're going to be at a job for a long time. And it's not just a firm. It's like if you don't like being a lawyer and you work for the X law firm, you say, well, I'm quitting, I'm going to the Y law firm. Chances are a lot of the things you didn't like about the X law firm are going to be in the Y law firm. So you leave that law firm, you go to the Z law firm and say, well, you do that too. And then all of a sudden your resume doesn't look so good because you've had a few jobs in a short period of time. So the idea, like Jane is saying, and speaking is so important, communicating is so important. That's true of all relationships, business, personal. And, a lot of times it may sound old fashioned, but you sit down with somebody and what do you like? What do you dislike? What's for you? What's not for you? And for example, that when I started to practice, I was a professor and I taught at night while I was building the practice up. And a lot of the students would come to me and say, I want to be a so-and-so, whatever it was. And I'd say, well, here's the best thing I recommend. As early as you can, like when you're in school, like as a part-time job or a summer job, go and work in a firm like that. And also talk to as many, whatever it is, you want to be an engineer, you want to be a doctor, you want to be an architect, talk to as many architects as you can and find out how they like the job. And if majority say, look, I'm stuck in here because I have a mortgage and bills and a family, but I hate it, that should be a consideration. And then try it yourself. And if you say, well, I worked in an architectural firm for a summer and I didn't like it. Another thing is expectations about earnings, what you don't want to do. And I've heard parents who have a list of majors that they say they won't pay for. And they say any major where you have to learn to say, do you want fries with that? You're just not going to support.
Oh, Steve and Chip, we just have to talk about quiet quitters with this because you mentioned direct and being from New York. I just want to say that the quiet quitters are trying to communicate so indirectly here that it's going to be very ineffective. I just can't see they're getting their message apart,
Yeah. It's interesting to think about
But
this.
when you talk with somebody, you also take a look at their work performance.
Yeah.
So even if they didn't tell you the truth, it's if a good job is doing X, Y, and Z, and you only did X, and even if they lied to you, you'd say, well, okay, I'm glad you feel that way, but what about Y and Z? You have to do Y and Z, and you didn't do that. So I'll do Y and Z for you this time. Now, for the next client, you got to do X, Y, and Z. And well, gee, you only did X. Again, no matter how much you say you love this, obviously you don't. So
But people just don't make decisions like that, unfortunately. People are emotionally driven. All of the cross-sectional research shows us that we are not rational thinking human beings. We are reactive emotionally and we are irrational first thing out of the bat. And I think that's really what a lot of people are doing with their careers right now. They're emotional. They don't feel good. You just mentioned how much people are unhappy right now in their jobs. It's 70% is the figure.
And there's another thing that causes unhappiness too. People get into something, they have no idea that the pay is so low, and then they might love the job, but they're miserable because they have to live with 19 roommates because they get paid so low. And let's face it, money's important. And even if you love basket weaving, what does a basket weaver earn? And if it's real low income for the rest of your life, do you want to basically live in a hovel and never can afford anything? And you have two shirts, one's in the laundry and one you're wearing. Do you want to live like that? And most people will say no. And also will affect who wants to be with you because, a spouse might say, well, you're a lovely person, but no, I don't want to live in the hovel with you.
It seems to me that, that the advent of AI threatening a lot of manufacturing jobs. And the pandemic kind of resignation, mass resignation, and I don't know what they're thinking right now. I'm kind of curious, but I'm just thinking the future, in even in jobs like with as yours as a tax attorney, and the tax attorneys that work for you. Theoretically, you might be able to put a lot of that into computers. Is this something that corporations, as they're moving forward, are thinking about the future of employees and whether or not it's the investment that it used to be? I can ask both of you. Does that question make sense?
Say that in another way.
Okay.
Joe.
So 30 years from now, as if I'm starting a business now, I'm looking at a plan for a generation and a half, right? And I'm thinking about employees. Am I looking because of what happened in the post-pandemic and then the HR nightmare that we all live in now? Is it makes, and you know what I mean when I say that? I mean I'm not against HR. I'm just saying it's a difficult playing field. Steve, is this something that obviously it's one of the biggest costs a business has, employees? Do you see this remaining strong in the time ahead, or have we crossed some kind of weird threshold?
I believe in my employees, and AI is to support human beings. At least as a tax attorney, they're never going to replace us because you need to talk to people and have judgment. And what happens is the AI can actually do the mundane stuff, so the attorney can have even more time to work with the client. That's how I view AI. And again, it's just like a doctor. Although we all have the same license, the skill that Dr. A has is different than the skill that Dr. B has. And you say, you know what? I literally would trust Dr. A with my life. Dr. B, nice person, but I wouldn't let him shine my shoes.
Yeah. Do you get a sense that the landscape is going to look the same in 30 years, though, Dr. Jane?
People are people, they're never going to be replaced. But what we do have to realize is that we have to be more accountable, because I think part of what scares us basically in AI is we could be replaced and we get fearful.
Yeah.
But I think that employers are really getting the message about accountability, and how, especially with the millennials, we have to hold them accountable. We have to almost teach them accountability, but that's on us. We have to have a system in place in our culture that says this is what you do and this is what we expect and this is what happens if you don't do it. Culture is two things. What are the rules and what happens when I break them? And I think that second part is what these employees are kind of going, I may be replaced because I don't know what happens if I break a rule.
And a good side of AI is it opens up the world to us. For example, the discussion we're having right now, we're in physically 3 different locations.
Yeah.
Before Zoom, we'd have to all be in some same room. Now you can be anywhere in the world and we can do this. So what that means is that as far as a pool of employers and employees, you now have the world as your marketplace. Because, for example, in the old days, basically your market was limited to reasonable commuting distance to your office. And if somebody in New York said, well, I want to work in California, they could, but they'd have to move, and maybe they don't want to move. Whereas today, that doesn't matter at all. You can be in New York and work for a firm in California.
I just believe, though, that business, this whole movement, this revolution in the last 20 years we've had with technology has been world changing and wonderful. And now we're ready for the next step. And the next step for business to get is that we cannot hang our emotions on the door when we walk in. We have to be able to talk and communicate at work. And that is, AI is never going to give you the solution to human communication, except make it maybe technically a little easier. We still have to get down to, what am I feeling? How do I communicate that in a reasonable way? And how do I make sure that people know what's going on with me?
Dr. Jane, thank you so much. Will you come back, please?
I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You were
Thanks so
great. I
much.
really appreciate that. This is an interesting one. We deal with a lot of acronyms and abbreviations, and I think this one's extremely interested. So tell our audience, what is an ERC and why is it important?
Employee retention credit. This is where the federal government is rewarding qualified employers with a grant. It's not a loan. They just give you the money. You never pay it back. You do whatever you want with the money. Chip, of up to $26,000 for every qualified employee. So if you had 10 qualified employees, you could get up to over $250,000. If you had 20 qualified employees, you could get up to over $500,000, and so on. Now, I realize everybody's facts, circumstance, and results are different, but we've had individual clients who received millions with this, and lots, hundreds of thousands, and smaller amounts. And again, not everybody is qualified, but a lot are. And where there's a terrible misunderstanding and misadvising is there are two different ways to qualify. I'm going to call one the easy way and the complex way. The easy way is if your gross revenue is down by a certain percentage, you qualify. That's easy. It's math. It's just, here's a number. Are you above or below it? But a lot of people, even trusted advisors, even CPAs, and I was a CPA before I was a tax attorney, are telling clients, if you don't meet the mathematical requirements, that's it. No ARC for you. No, there's a facts and circumstances test. And if you say, well, who am I to believe? My trusted advisor or somebody I'm watching on a podcast? The answer is don't believe any of us. Go to the IRS website. The IRS website lists both methods, and then they clearly say either or. So what's a few examples? For example, here in California, and most jurisdictions have had that, we could all, from the beginning of the pandemic and quite a while into it, you could only use the inside of your business 25% of capacity. That may qualify you. Some people say, oh, I was an essential business. So's the grocery store, but they had to only use 25% of capacity. Or you had supply chain disruptions, or your clients or customers were closed because of COVID restrictions. And I could go on and on and on and on, but I know we have another guest waiting to come
Well, so
on.
okay, so basically, if you have a business and you think you may qualify, they can just call you and you'll tell them. I mean, it's a
Absolutely,
AAA
it's as
tax deal.
simple as that.
Yeah, just
And Chip, even if somebody said you don't qualify because your gross revenue wasn't down enough, that's only one of two
Yeah.
methods.
Okay.
Call us, we'll explain both methods, and then we'll go into the complexities of the other one. If you qualify, this is free money from the federal government, and you should take all to which you're legally entitled.
You can get more of these Ask a Tax Attorney. We cover a lot of issues, and Steve does this really well. You can follow us on YouTube or go to moskowitzllp.com and track us down from there. Our next guest is a partner with Unity Search Group. He's one of the top recruiting companies in the country. David Cathey is nice enough to join us here on Practical Tax. David, good to have you here. And Steve and I are glad you could make the time.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Steve.
Let's just jump right in right here. There was a couple stories here. This past couple of weeks, Brookings Institutions came up with an incredibly high amount to raise kids, over $300,000 to raise a kid. So, there's that consideration. But the other part about this is there's been a couple studies that have come out and questioned whether a college education is a wise investment for parents. I mean, all of us want to feel like we're doing the right things for our kids. But telling a kid, you're not really worth $200,000 for college. I'm going to send you to a trade school. All of this, right? The companies that recruit individuals, how important is a college degree today?
Yeah, Chip, I would say it depends on what that individual is going to be doing. If you're a tax attorney, if you're a doctor, if you're a CPA, then yeah, college education is going to be incredibly important. In fact, that 4-year degree is going to turn into a 6-8-year degree, depending on what you're going after. I think the conversation that parents have to go back to your initial comment, parents have to have is really understanding how their kid has responded throughout their education. And a lot of times the kid knows, is college for me? Is school for me? Do I like school, or do I like working with my hands? And in the event that it's just not cut out for them, then they have the option of going to a trade or a vocational school where they can work directly with whatever medium they want to work with, whether it's auto mechanics or plumbing. And now we're seeing a great living that these people are earning with a ton of jobs that are open right now.
My plumber drives a Lexus. That's all I'm saying.
Well, have you tried to get a plumber to your house? I have a house that I've tried to get a plumber, and they're booked out for a week because the demand is so high right now.
Steve, when people talk about hiring, that's just one half of it. Retaining is the other part. And I'm sure that both you guys have great tips on ways to retain talent. Steve, how do you do it? I mean, you attract the top tax attorneys in the Bay Area to come work for you. And you obviously, you want to keep them sharp. You want to keep them on task, but how do you keep them there?
As you know, I have a number of people that we've worked together for 20, 25 years. And when I work with someone, it's my hope that we can have a lifetime together, that they'll make their career with the firm. Now, sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not, but we take a look at, is this a job somebody wants to take? In my treating of people, and basically, the golden rule, it's simple stuff, but it really works. I treat people the way I'd want to be treated. I see the way some employers treat their employees, and my basic reaction to them is, if the ancient Pharaoh could come alive and see the way you've treated your assistant, he'd be shocked at such treatment of human beings. And it's just, there are things you'll see in firms that are just incredibly wrong. And plus, are the people suited for this? Do they like doing it? What's the satisfaction here? And the bottom line is, part of it to me, I think, is common sense. And part of it is the right person doing what they want. And also, there's so much that can be done. And suppose you had different positions open. You say, well, okay, do you prefer doing X, Y, or Z? Okay, you like Z? That's fine. You do Z and you be good at Z, and we'll find somebody else to do X, and we'll find somebody else to do Y. There's all kinds.
Are they comfortable in the interview process, though, about saying about things they can't do? And because I know that everybody want the job. And so do some people kind of in a good way, but maybe exaggerate their skill set?
The first thing I do is, when I interview somebody, I say, relax and, be truthful with me, because if you're not, it's going to be bad for both of us. If you take a job you're not suited for, we're both going to suffer on this. Now, I realize not everybody tells the truth, and some people really need that job, but that's where your skills as an interviewer come in, and to the best of your ability, you try to choose the right people. And again, nothing's 100%, Chip. You know that.
Yeah. Hey, David. So my buddy, one of my closest friends, just retired for 30 years at J&J, and he was in sales. And he would always take somebody before hiring them to a restaurant to see how they dealt with the staff and the waitress and the waiter. Were they kind? Were they considerate? Those little tells. Is that a part of recruiting? Do you have like something maybe you can't tell me, like a little tell that you guys use?
It's the car ride test, right, Chip? I mean, let's go on a car ride real quick and let's see if you and I can get along the entire car ride. It's really hard. I think, an interview is a sales job, and the interviewee is trying to sell themselves to the interviewer. And I think, as Steve said, relax, let's be truthful. That's got to come out. But you as an interviewer really do have to set the proper stage. What is the life going to be like at this company? You're not trying to sell them at times to come to your company, unless you know their background and they've been highly referred to you. But you got to poke holes in their story and really set the stage of what it's going to be like. And then once they get there, that's hiring the right person. Once they get there, it's about the culture and the environment that you create. And back in the day, culture was, let's get a ping pong table in the office and a basketball goal, and let's have breaks and have fun all the time. But culture is also accountability.
And there's another thing that I like to do is, I say, well, we have a firm. It's not all about me. I want you to talk to some of the people that work here, and I don't want to be present, so you can tell each other the truth. And I'll talk to you again, and let's see if they think you're right for us. And also, in talking to people, you can ask them, what am I like? What's the work like? And then we can get a better feel for each other. That's another thing that I like to do.
How long have they had recruiting firms, David? Because were there headhunters 50 years ago?
There were headhunters 50 years ago. And the recruiting field is all about getting to know people and getting to know your clients and candidates and trying to make the right match. We're not forcing people. We shouldn't be forcing people to take jobs. That's not what our goal is. Our goal is to present a candidate that a client would not have come across otherwise. And then to the candidate, it's to present a client that the candidate would not have seen otherwise, and let the magic happen. And hopefully it works out for both parties.
You have a list, and give me some of the highlights of the top jobs that you can get without a college degree.
Auto mechanic, plumbing, even nail technicians, trade, the transportation industry. We all know about the supply chain issues that we've had recently. So the transportation industry's demand for people has skyrocketed, and there is a construction industry trade. So that has increased enrollment, and those trade and vocational schools have increased in enrollment 19.3% because of the demand in construction. So there's a lot of opportunity for people out there that don't have to go to a 4-year college.
And, you know, Billy Gates and Steve Jobs did okay without a college degree.
Well, you know, it's funny. When they went into IBM and they were kind of treated, you know, IBM had a chance to have Gates and Wozniak. I mean, not Gates, Jobs and Wozniak as part of their team, and probably Gates as well. And they thought that that they were the ultimate, and that how could these kids working out of a garage come up with a better idea? And of course, the rest is history. I guess at the end of this, really,
that's what happens when you have a closed mind. And sometimes what happens when you have, I'll never forget, I had a job in New York many moons ago, and there was one gentleman that had been there for a long time. And when I took the job, it was before I was an attorney. And when I took the job, the requirement was you had to have a master's degree in accounting and be a CPA. And he told me that when he took the job, the only requirement was high school graduate. He said then they required college graduate. Then they required master's degree. Then they required CPA. He said, still the same job. By the way, he was a supervisor of the department.
Does it, I mean, if your kid came to you, Dave, and said, I want to major in liberal arts and I want to go to Brown, you know, which is $60,000 a year. That doesn't seem like a likely payoff for a $250,000 investment, but are we missing something there?
Well, again, it's knowing your kid and knowing what they want to do for their career and what they're going to be best at, and then guiding them. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they're going to have to make a good decision for themselves, but you as a parent have to guide them down the proper path for your kid. You know them better than anybody else does, right? You know them better than the high school counselor or the college recruiting program coming to the high school to try to get their enrollment up. And so your job as that parent is really guiding their career path and really understanding, can my kiddo make it at a 4-year degree? And then once they do, are they actually going to get a job that applies what they learned in that 4-year degree? In many cases, they don't.
And Dave, there's another thing that I would add. It's really important to talk to young people about money, because when kids are in high school, they don't think about that. They just, what's fun and what's nice, and they don't think about money. And, you know, people that have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, they are so bitter when they now have become a barista or they're waiting on tables and they say, you know, I have a degree in so-and-so. But that, one of the things that I say is, well, okay, unless you're independently wealthy, what does that job pay? And what's the likelihood that you'll be able to get a job doing it? I was a poor boy. The reason I chose accounting when I went to college was, to me, college was like a vocational or trade school. I learned how to become an accountant. And the reason I chose accounting was I said, oh, there's a lot of accounting jobs around and they paid well. And then I said, well, wait a minute, I can do an awful lot more as an attorney. And I became an attorney. But the bottom line is, there's an awful lot of people that don't give any consideration, especially when they're young. It's you know, they like some professor or there's a subject. It's like history was a fun subject. My history professor in college was a fantastic guy. And it was really fascinating. People used to come into his classroom, weren't even registered for the class, just to listen to him. He was such a fascinating, interesting guy. But he would be the first to tell you that if you get a degree in history, your job opportunities are really limited, and the pay you're going to get as a history teacher is not going to be that much.
Steve and David, I guess you guys are both, the culture and the types of jobs we have now. In many cases, I met a guy in an airplane. His job was to repair breaks in the undersea cable in the Atlantic. I mean, I said, how did you learn to do that? And he goes, I dropped out of high school, but I was interested, and I just listened afterwards. I mean, there's an old joke about, don't let college get in the way of your education, and there's aspects to that are true. I had a girlfriend that took me to the Hirshhorn, to the Monet exhibit when I was like 21. It changed the way I looked at the world forever. I can't put a dollar attachment to that, but I know it helped me. So it's interesting. Both you guys seem to have that awareness that is so important, and the intellectual and emotional growth of people today that, boy, need a lot of that help, right? Because social media, there's something happening right now that I don't think we fully understand. And it's difficult to traverse that, I think, from many kids, many young people.
Yeah, Chip, I would say that one of the things I've learned over the past couple of weeks, as we've seen this increase in trade schools and vocational schools, is the kids who are coming out of high school, they're never more suited. There's never been a time more suited for them to jump into many of those programs, because as we know, our cars are now computers. Well, they are so savvy with computers, they're jumping in and hitting the ground running. You've got tankless water heaters that are driven based off of computers.
Yeah.
And so we
have one. Our tankless water heater is the size of a suitcase. It sits down. It's like, and when the guy brought it in, I go, that's a water heater? So you're right.
And so the kiddos coming out today they're just stepping right in, and they're learning so much quicker. So if you think about where we're at, we've got the baby boomers who are exiting the workforce, which is the largest generation we've ever had. And in the 80s and 90s, we had a decline in trade school. So that is why there's such a demand for people in these skill fields, and they're stepping into a computer-based environment in many cases.
Well, that's what I love about practical tax. Sometimes we take a kind of a larger view of, we step back, and you can see things that affect ultimately it always ends up at Steve's office at some day with somebody with an interesting idea and an investment idea, a business idea. And I'm glad we have people like both of you guys directing them. David, thank you so much. Will you come back with us?
Thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks, Chip. Thanks, Steve.
Do well. Again, David Cathey, recruiting partner at United Search Group. Steve, that was an interesting show. Really different stuff.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. You be well. Look forward to you. Again, find us anywhere you find anything on the web, on YouTube, Facebook. Also go to MoskowitzLLP.com. And if you ever have a question, there's a lot of smart people waiting there. Just call 888-TAX-DEAL. That's Steve Moskowitz, tax attorney. I'm Chip Franklin. Be well. See you next time on Practical Tax.
The Practical Tax Podcast with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz.